Born on the 17th of March 1880 in Putney, at the time Surrey but now in Greater London, Lawrence Oates came from noble stock with family roots in Yorkshire. Oates briefly attended Eton College before dropping out due to ill health, and subsequently opted for the military route in life. At the age of 18 he was commissioned into the 3rd Battalion of the West Yorkshire Regiment, and saw active duty in the Second Boer War as a junior officer. In March 1901 at Wimberg, Oates and a small party found themselves ambushed by Boer troops, and with all his comrades wounded or killed and a bullet through his left thigh, Oates was twice called upon to surrender, but replied, "We came to fight, not to surrender." Oates survived, but walked with a limp for the rest of his life due to his shattered left thigh bone. He was recommended for the Victoria Cross for his gallantry. In 1902 he was promoted to lieutenant, and left Cape Town at the end of the Second Boer War shortly after this. Oates continued his military career, serving in Ireland, Egypt and India, achieving the rank of captain in 1906. He acquired the nickname Titus after the historical figure Titus Oates, who fabricated the Popish Plot, a Catholic conspiracy to kill King James of England. After over a decade of active military service, acquiring life-changing injuries in the process, most men would deservedly opt for the quiet life. Oates was made of something different though, and although he left the military in 1910, he chose an endeavour which was somehow more challenging. He applied to join Robert Falcon Scott's Terra Nova Expedition to reach the South Pole for the first time in history. Scott had tried and failed with his Discovery expedition of 1901 to 1904, but by 1910 he was giving it another go. Oates was accepted from 8,000 applicants due to his expertise with horses, as well as his ability to make a contribution of £1,000, equivalent to roughly £150,000 in today's money. Nicknamed the Soldier by his fellow expedition members, Oates' role was to look after the 19 ponies Scott intended on using for the sledge hauling during the first phase of the expedition. He impressed so much that out of the 65 men on the Terra Nova expedition, Scott selected Oates as one of his 5-man party who would travel the final distance to the pole. Scott and Oates were accompanied by Edward Adrian Wilson, an ornithologist, artist and natural historian, and the Royal Navy officers Henry Robertson Bowers and Edgar Evans. Scott was also a Royal Navy officer and had become involved with the Antarctic expedition after a chance meeting with the president of the Royal Geographic Society, Sir Clements Markham, who inspired him to reach the Antarctic. The Terra Nova expedition left Britain in 1910 and set up base camp at Cape Evans on Ross Island. Scott and his 5-man team embarked on their final push in November 1911, after enduring the long, dark Antarctic winter at base camp. Unbeknownst to Scott, around the same time of their embarkation, another team began their approach to the South Pole from the other side of the Ross Ice Shelf. Roald Amundsen, the Norwegian explorer, had only made his surreptitious plans public on the 9th of September, as he was originally scheduled to be embarking for the North Pole, until American explorers Frederick Cook and Robert Peary claimed that they had reached the North Pole in 1909. Amundsen had kept his South Pole mission secret until the last possible moment, and now caused considerable consternation in the Terra Nova camp. Scott's expedition was as much a scientific endeavour as it was a race to the pole, and was due to collect new fossils, study emperor penguins, and chart new glaciers and mountain ranges. However, Amundsen's recent revelation served to spur Scott and his team on to reach the pole first at all costs. Scott's strategy was different to Amundsen's, and relied on a hybrid approach of using motorised sledges, ponies, and dogs. Amundsen's was much more simple, and relied on 100 Greenland sled dogs that he had personally handpicked. Early on in the expedition, it became apparent that Scott's strategy was fundamentally flawed. The motorised sledges broke down, the ponies struggled in the deep snow and extreme cold. Ponies, unlike dogs, had sweat glands, and under extreme exertion their perspiration froze and caused hypothermia. As a result, the ponies were mercifully slaughtered early on into the expedition. Scott decided that the dogs would also be left with a rear party to help the advance team on the return journey, so Scott and his companions had to manhaul the heavy sleds themselves for most of the way. The weather was also unseasonably bad for what was the Antarctic warm months, and blizzards slowed progress considerably. Despite this, through sheer determination, the team of 5, Scott, Oates, Bowers, Wilson and Evans, reached the South Pole on the 17th of January, only to see a black flag next to a tent. They knew what this meant. Inside the tent was a letter from Amundsen to the King of Norway, which stated that the Norwegians had arrived on the 14th of December 1911, 35 days before the British team. This would have been a demoralising blow for the already struggling group. The conditions were also beginning to take their toll. Evans and Oates specifically were showing signs of worsening frostbite. Evans was also nursing an injury on his hand that wasn't healing, and had banged his head from falling down a crevasse into the ice. Scott's diary reveals him worrying about the conditions of Evans. He is absolutely changed from his normal self-reliant self. Near the bottom of the Beardmore Glacier, Evans collapsed and died on the 17th of February. The party then met with 3 ultimately critical difficulties: the non-appearance of the dogs' teams at the rendezvous point, an unexpected drop in temperature, and a shortage of fuel. By this point, Oates' frostbitten foot was slowing down proceedings, and the military man was aware of this. On multiple occasions he volunteered to be left behind in his sleeping bag to be overcome by the obvious, but Scott, Bowers and Wilson were having none of it. Scott especially was determined not to lose any more men, despite the obvious burden Oates had become on his companions. On the 17th of March 1912, his 32nd birthday, Captain Lawrence Edward Grace Oates decided to take matters into his own hands. In the midst of a -40-degree blizzard, he stood up on his badly frostbitten feet and left the tent, saying, "I am just going outside, and maybe some time." The remaining 3 knew all too well what Oates was doing and tried to dissuade him, but Oates was single-minded. He knew that he was slowing down his companions, and with fuel almost gone and rations low, he decided that sacrificing his own life to improve the chances of the others was the only right thing to do. Scott's diary entry from the day read, "We knew that poor Oates was walking to his death, but though we tried to dissuade him, we knew it was the act of a brave man and an English gentleman." Unfortunately, Oates' selfless sacrifice didn't have the desired effect. Halted by a severe blizzard 3 days later on the 20th of March, the group were trapped in their tent, too cold and weak to continue, and they died 9 days later, only 11 miles short of the nearest food depot that could have saved them. Their bodies were discovered by a search party on the 12th of November, along with Scott's daily diary and all their scientific notes, which confirmed new groundbreaking discoveries. Oates' body, however, was never found. Near where he was presumed to have died, a cairn and cross were erected, bearing the inscription, "Hereabouts died a very gallant gentleman, Captain L.E.G. Oates, of the Inniskilling Dragoons. In March 1912, returning from the Pole, he walked willingly to his death in a blizzard to try and save his comrades, beset by hardships." The phrase, "a very gallant gentleman," was immortalised in the painting by John Charles Dolman, depicting Oates walking out to his heroic death. In 1913, his brother officers erected a brass memorial plaque to him in the parish church of St Mary the Virgin in Gestingthorpe, Essex. Oates' mother, Caroline, faithfully polished the plaque every week until she died. Oates was well remembered for his gallantry. The fateful expedition captured the hearts of the British and international public, and Oates' act of self-sacrifice embodied the British stiff upper lip spirit. Sacrificing one's own self without complaint for the greater good. Oates, Scott, Wilson, Bowers and Evans may have been unsuccessful in their endeavour, but the story of their heroic efforts will endure for eternity.